Yesterday, the latest Saw film, Saw X, dropped in theaters, and here's the biggest Saw twist yet. Critics actually like this one. As of right now, it has an 87% on Rotten Tomatoes. Previously, the Saw film with the highest Rotten Tomatoes score was the original with only a 50%. So today I'm going to stop and rank all 10 Saw films from the worst to the best. Today's video is brought to you by HelloFresh. With HelloFresh, you get farm-fresh, pre-portioned ingredients and seasonal recipes delivered right to your doorstep. HelloFresh handles all the meal planning and shopping to deliver everything you need to cook up a tasty meal right at your home. They do all the hard part, and you get to take all the credit. HelloFresh's menu includes 40 recipes and over 100 add-on items to choose from every week, from veggie to family-friendly to fit and wholesome. We went with family-friendly, and here's what we loved about it. Right now, we have 3 kids at 3 different schools. We don't have extra time. The instructions were simple enough that a newer cook like me could figure it all out, and all 5 of us enjoyed it so much that we wanted more. Go to HelloFresh.com/50SeanChandler and use code 50SeanChandler for 50% off plus 15% off the next 2 months. HelloFresh is America's #1 meal kit, and you can get 50% off plus 15% off the next 2 months at HelloFresh.com/50SeanChandler and use code 50SeanChandler. In last place, Saw 3D. By this point in time, the franchise had simply run out of steam, and they were desperately trying to keep it going through gimmicks, and in the case of this movie, they went with 3D with a string of ideas that don't cohesively flow together, a series of traps just for the shock value of seeing people being tortured and the gimmick of having the guts and blood spray right at the screen. But I think at this run of the franchise, the big problem is that Hoffman was not a character worthy of 4 different movies. He's like maybe a 1-movie run at most. He's just a nutty guy that for some reason is always able to escape. So it just feels cheap and lazy, like pretty much everything else in this movie. Like there's a sequence in this film where they flash back to Jigsaw confronting the main guy that's being tested, and they literally just turn his cap backwards to de-age him, as if turned cap backwards makes a 60-year-old man look young and hip.
Your name, sir? John.
How do you do, fellow kids?
I know a lot of people oppose calling this franchise torture porn. By the time you get to this movie, it's tough to argue that it's not. I mean, the death of Chester from Lincoln Park is comedically over the top, and then it crescendos with an innocent woman being slowly cooked alive. The guy did everything he was supposed to, and still his wife is brutally murdered in front of him. And the way they brought Dr. Gordon back was so unsatisfying. It just felt like they wanted one final twist before closing things out, but didn't care about telling a compelling and interesting story. And so they bring him back after Jigsaw's wife has already died, which makes him seem incompetent, and like character choices don't matter at all. It's just whatever the screenwriters want to do. One more death, one more twist, whatever. While I'm talking, be sure to share your ranking down below in the comment section. My list is not the right list, it's just my list, and I would love to see yours. I was a little bit later to the franchise. I hopped on with Jigsaw, so I wasn't a part of the original run, so there's certain things that happened in those movies that just never connected with me as much as a bunch of the OG fans. So I'm gonna have some takes that you guys find pretty wacky, in particular, my strong disdain for the Hoffman saga. With that in mind, number 9, Saw 6. And based off my comment section of previous rankings and a number of conversations I have, apparently a lot of people really like this one. And if that's the case, awesome, cool. Let me know why down below. Don't just yell at me down below. I just don't like this Hoffman run of films. For the second movie in a row, Hoffman just evades capture. No one can catch him. He can always wiggle his way out of it. But the movie doesn't really do anything to make it clear as to why he's this smart why he's this good at just escaping things. You're watching it like, I don't like this guy. He is just brutally murdering people in traps that you can't escape. He's killing police officers. It's not interesting. It's just unpleasant for me. Beyond that, during this entire run of movies, it got to a point in time where the games and the Hoffman escape stuff are totally unrelated. And I just think that's such lazy storytelling and script writing. And in the case of this one, the movie's just bogged down by excessive flashbacks. And by this point in time in the franchise, the entire idea of Jigsaw's worldview is kind of abandoned.
I'm a murderer.
I despise murderers.
And there's all these tests and games where inevitably multiple people have to die. You got the shotgun roulette. A lot of people are gonna die, and they have no choice in that. This movie just has so much talk about insurance companies, and with where the movie ends and how it tackles this stuff, and it sends a really weird, borderline irresponsible message. Probably the best thing about this movie, though, is that it can function as an origin story for Roderick.
Roderick rules?
Yes!
One piece of credit I will give to this one, that the twist at the end with whose family it is that's been taken, I think that is effective. Next up, Saw 4, and I think this one has a good bit more to offer for me than the bottom two on the list. In particular, I think Scott Patterson from Gilmore Girls just adds a little bit more charisma to the mix, and that it isn't a total scumbag. You got plenty of flashbacks in here that, in the case of this movie, start to kind of unpack why Jigsaw got so cynical. I think when you get to this point in time in the franchise and it starts just layering movies and timelines on top of each other and the ends of 2, 3, and 4 all kind of crescendo together, it's convoluted, but there is something weirdly addictive about that connectivity. This is where Lee Winnell, James Wan started getting further and further away from the franchise, not even really working on scripts and stories. And I think it really shows in sort of the wit of what's going on. A lot of that's gone, and it's much more, we've got a formula. Other big problem here on this movie is I just don't find the cop being tested in this one interesting like at all. He's not like a memorable standout character. And then the final message that like he needs to learn to try not to save people because they need to save themselves is like a really weird message. Like they're trying so hard to have Jigsaw to have a lesson to teach in a context where it's like, come on, what are we doing now? And even the twist with Hoffman just feels like a spin on the twist of the original film. So for the most part, besides a few things that is like, that's kind of fun, that's kind of interesting, this one doesn't work terribly well for me. Number 7, Saw 5, and this one was a slight improvement for me over Saw 4 because I found the characters more interesting, and we got some useful information about Hoffman's backstory. But as you can tell from my ranking, this entire run of Hoffman films, I just don't think really work because he was the wrong character for us to follow. One of the things that just really bugged me about this film, and if you're wondering why Jigsaw is placed better than this movie, a lot of it even boils down to the end of the film where the Scott Patterson character, Luke from Gilmore Girls, uses his wits to track down our villain. And all throughout the movie, he's shown to be resourceful, and all of a sudden, the script just introduces this deus ex machina reason why he gets caught in a trap. He didn't do anything wrong. He didn't screw anything up. It just kind of dupes him, and it dupes the audience. He gets tripped and dies, and the guy that hasn't done anything particularly interesting survives. And I just think it's just this tedious continuation. Wish he was more interesting so I could place it better, but there's the problem that we have with all of these. And it spends a lot of time answering questions I wasn't asking about Hoffman because I wasn't asking any questions about Hoffman. But the reason that it is a little bit higher up in this section of the ranking is that I like the characters in the game more. And the actors and actresses that are a part of that with, Julie Benz, a bunch of, someone from the Shazam family, a lot of familiar faces in there, and they're just people I got more invested in because the actors themselves are people that I care about and have just a little bit more of that screen presence and charm. So despite the story being disconnected from everything else, for that reason, it's above these other ones in the Hoffman saga. Then we have Jigsaw, and I know a ton of you hate this one and have it way down at the bottom. And I imagine if I had watched the original run of films when they came out and was more invested in the time, it probably would have played very differently for me. As for me, I watched all of these movies for the first time leading up to Jigsaw. This is the first one I saw in the theater. So the return of John Kramer Jigsaw himself to me didn't probably mean as much to me as it did to you. It didn't feel as much like a bait and switch as it probably did to you. This is not a great Saw film. It's not a great film at anything like that. I just think it works a little bit better as a standalone film than the four below this, where they're just so disjointed. They're about a character I don't care about. The games and investigation are so disconnected. And with this one, the timeline doesn't make any sense. There's enormous lapses in logic, and the end of it feels like a big bait and switch. But at least it feels like a cohesive story in and of itself, where the parts all fit together. So I've never fully understood why some people hate this one as much as they do. And I imagine that's a point of perspective thing, but it's not good. I don't think it's a disaster either. I think it's silly to, like, once again be like, there was another secret apprentice that we didn't know about.
Kramer gave people a chance to win the game. You have a choice. Scream or don't.
Like, we don't need any of that, but the hate seems exaggerated. Number 5, Spiral. And to be perfectly clear, there's a big jump between Jigsaw and Spiral for me. I like Spiral. I think that this is a good Saw film. And this is one where I'm actually very surprised how much people hate this movie. And I don't really even fully understand the logic here. From my perspective, this movie gets back to the Saw light vibe of the original run of Saw films. It returns to kind of this police investigation where there's more of a kind of a clear plot going on here. Chris Rock and Samuel L. Jackson are obviously very charismatic actors with a screen presence, so you care more about what's going on with them. There's a story with character arcs that all kind of tie into the game that's taking place, so it's a more cohesive film as a whole. And even with the traps themselves, they have a bit of wit to them in that someone that talks has their tongue ripped out.
Only your weight will rip away your lying tongue and save you.
Brings a little bit of that cleverness back into the franchise. And I can understand where, like, maybe it feels too detached. There's no Jigsaw. And so maybe it's not for some of you, or there's disappointment because of that. The hate, though, I legitimately don't understand. Now, I don't think it's fantastic. I don't think it's great. It is a bit generic. By focusing so much on the cop stuff, it can feel rather familiar. But this felt like, yeah, we got to continue things. We got to change things up, but also got to get back to some of the elements of the original few films. That's what this did for me, with a couple of actors that I like to see on the big screen. So this one absolutely works for me. Number 4, Saw 3. And I think without question, the original run of Saw films where Leigh Whannell was still writing, James Wan was still involved, are easily the best 3 of the original run of films in just the way that they were structured, the nature of the traps and everything. But also, more importantly, Jigsaw was still alive. And Jigsaw is the star of this franchise, but he was always handled in such a strange fashion. And in recent interviews, the producers have made it clear that they deeply regret killing off Jigsaw so soon. But when it comes to this movie, I think the thing that really makes it stand out is that you've got Robert the Bruce from Braveheart playing the game. And I think that this is the game that is most memorable of the whole franchise, where with his character, his performance, the nature of the traps that he has to deal with all these people, this is the one that sticks in my mind the most and has some of the most horrifying stuff in there with the choices that he has to make. And I mean, the rack, ugh, that one lingered with me a little while after seeing the film. I think there are some flaws here. You still have a Lee Winnell script, but it feels like a first draft, like you only had so much time to write it, which he did only have so much time to write it because they were cranking these things out one every single year for a while there. And then big frustration on this one. Jigsaw's treatment of the guy in the trap's wife feels like a blatant violation of his rules.
I'm a murderer.
I despise murderers.
And that's stuff that, like, the more Jigsaw feels consistent, like he actually believes in it and the writers actually play that out properly, the more interesting it is. When it feels like he's just a nutty guy that spouts this pretentious stuff, it always compromises the movies for me. Real quick, before I give you my top 3, remember to join me down below in the comment section. Share your ranking of the Saw films. I'm sure you passionately disagree with some of my placements. I totally get it, but I also passionately disagree with a bunch of your placements. That's the fun part. Let's just keep it respectful. Also, if you enjoy these types of videos, I've done a ton of different horror franchise rankings. You can check them out right up here in a playlist somewhere around here. I mean, I've done all the big ones: Halloween, Evil Dead, Nightmare on Elm Street, Friday the 13th, Exorcist, all of that fun stuff. If you enjoy horror rankings, I've got something else that you'll enjoy. In third place, the original Saw, and it's pretty remarkable what James Wan and Lee Winnell were able to pull off with this film with under $1 million, and it just goes to show how much raw talent they had at a very young age. So they wrote this very small script that's largely about two people in a room and developed this whole mythology surrounding this killer that kind of has this code to everything that he's doing, developed this whole new idea about the games, the traps, that they're witty, they're clever, they're not just an axe to the head, and it all kind of ties into something bigger and grander that's an interesting mythology that you want to explore, that makes you want to learn more about Jigsaw and everything going on, and especially in the case of this movie, builds to this real nice crescendo that's one of the great final twists of any horror film ever. And the music itself is such a big part to that it just does such an amazing job of making everything swell as Jigsaw is revealed and we get our final game over.
Game over.
Ends on such a great note. I think all of that, the premise, the concept, the ending, the franchise that is launched, are all actually better than the movie itself. What they're able to do with $1 million was incredible. In particular, you got some really big name actors in this thing, several more that would go on to do big things after this. But I think its budget does kind of restrain it a little bit. It makes for a little bit of an odd structure. They're not able to do some things as much as you probably would like them to. So I don't think that this is actually like a great film. I think it's a good film that kicks off a very interesting franchise. And what their accomplishment with what they had at their disposal at their age as a first film, incredible. And it's no surprise that James Wan has gone on to direct multiple billion-dollar films, launched multiple other massive horror franchises because he's incredible talent. Lee Winnell has his own phenomenal career as in his own right. And then the franchise has continued onward because all of the great stuff that was in here. But I think this movie does have more flaws than some people recognize as a film itself. Our runner-up, Saw 2. And for me, this movie took everything that was cool about the first movie and was able to expand upon it. Without the very tight budget constraints of the original, it's able to tell a bigger story that flows more smoothly and doesn't have to try and like cut corners to find a way to be able to film everything at the budget that they had. And for that reason, it's just a more cohesive, stronger film as a whole. But really, the big thing that elevates this one for me is the fact that Jigsaw himself is front and center.
Sit here and talk to me. What? If you can do that long enough, you will find your son in a safe and secure state.
He's the most interesting character in the franchise. He's the best character of the franchise. And in this movie, the whole film is him being investigated, and we're learning about his worldview, his backstory, and getting just a chilling performance from Tobin Bell. So without getting to the point in time in the franchise where we're starting to like get tired and run out of fuel, you've got an investigation that ties into the game taking place. You have Jigsaw himself front and center, and we're hearing all of his stuff for the first time without just like getting convoluted about all of it.
I've never murdered anyone in my life. The decisions are up to them.
It has the big twist about the timeline of everything taking place, as well as how Donnie Wahlberg didn't follow by all the rules. So for me, this one does everything it's supposed to do, takes the first film, gives it the budget to be able to really pull it off in a satisfying big way. So this for me was my favorite of the Saw franchise, and certainly of the original run, until a couple days ago. Coming in first place, the new one, Saw X. I can't think of a different example where in one of my rankings, the 10th movie in the franchise was my favorite of the bunch. But as soon as they announced the premise of this film and put out the trailer, I went, I think that's it. I think 20 years into this franchise, they finally cracked the code of what will make for a great Saw film. And it kind of feels so obvious. Take the lead of the franchise, the most interesting character, put him front and center. He's the protagonist that we are following. The movie is from his perspective. That's never happened before. And the way the story is told, we see why the people in the game are awful people before they're put in the game. And it just dramatically shifts the vibe of the movie, the way you feel as they're being tortured. And it makes everything better. It has a cohesive story that kind of is its own package deal. It manages to have little moments of humor in it, really dark humor with like Jigsaw thinks he's been healed and he goes out for a nice walk in nature and starts drawing in his journal. And then it cuts to a shot of him drawing the bear trap, reverse bear trap and stuff like that. There's villain twists, there's Jigsaw, Amanda twists, and then the kid shows up in it that throws Jigsaw's plan off. And just like adds emotion into it where you see he's like actually distraught that an innocent child is in jeopardy. It just had everything I wanted, a cohesive story, tied things in, emotion, laughs.
Sometimes we get sucked into things that are against our nature.
Gabriella had her own free will. And if you can't handle this, how will you handle the rest of our work?
Like, this is it. This is the formula for a Saw film. Like, this to me, easily the best standalone film. You did it. Your 10th movie's the best one, so it comes in at number 1. Remember, if you want great meals delivered to your home, you got that link down below in the description to check out HelloFresh. If you want more rankings just like this one, check out that playlist right over there. Thank you so much for watching, and keep talking movies and TV too much. Bye-bye.